Hi guys, and thank you for joining me for another tech story. Today we're going to talk about one of my favorite topics in IT, and that is Linux. If you're an IT professional or aspiring to be an IT professional, knowing Linux is a must-have skill. So if you're a programmer, a system engineer, a network engineer, a system administrator, you need to know Linux. So what we're going to do today is we're going to install a virtual machine on our computer, and we're going to install Linux Debian on top of this. And this way you get to practice your Linux skills without endangering your actual computer. So if you break your virtual machine, your computer is intact and you can keep using it. But before we get into this, I want to take a moment and talk about what is virtualization. There's two types of virtualization. There's hardware virtualization and there's software virtualization. Your computer system is made of 4 layers. You have your hardware first. That includes your CPU, your RAM, your network card, your hard disk or SSD, your motherboard, and all that good stuff. On top of that, you have your firmware, or ROM for short, and that is a very primitive operating system that does hardware inspection and looks for your actual OS. On top of that, we have our actual operating system, such as Linux, Windows, and Mac. And finally, we have our services, such as web browsing, email, games, and all that good stuff that we actually buy computers for. So what virtualization do is that it creates an abstraction level or layer between either on top of either the firmware or the OS, depending on what type of virtualization you're using, and we're going to get into this. And that abstraction level has access to your hardware, and it can divide your hardware into different virtual machines. So let us talk about the two types of virtualization. First, we have our hardware virtualization, which goes directly on your hardware before you install any operating systems. So it divides your computer into multiple virtual computers, and on top of those you can install your operating system. So it creates an abstraction layer on top of your firmware, and on top of that you can create as many virtual machines as you want. Of course, that depends on how much resources you have on your computer. So as much resources as you have, you can create as many virtual machines as you want. And then we have our software virtual machine, which is what we're going to be using today. And that creates an abstraction layer on top of your actual operating system. And for this, we use a virtualization software that we install on top of our operating system. And on top of that, you can create as many virtual machines as your hardware components allow. And this type is slower than the hardware type, of course, because you're running your actual operating system along with this operating system that is running on top, so it can slow things down. But it is a very handy dandy thing to have, so you can practice your Linux or any operating system for that matter. Now that we have this covered, let's go ahead and start. We're going to be downloading VirtualBox today, Oracle VirtualBox. It's a free virtualization software, and on top of that we're going to install Linux Debian. I'm going to leave the download links in the description. So you just need to open the link for the VirtualBox download that I left in the description, and you land on a similar page to this. I'm using Windows 10, so I'm gonna download the Windows hosts, but if you're using Mac, go ahead and press on OS X host. So I already downloaded this, so I don't need to download it again. After you're finished with downloading VirtualBox, go ahead and download Linux Debian. I'm gonna leave the link in the description also. When you open that link, you'll land on a similar page. There's two types of images or installation images. There's a small installation image and there's a complete installation image. The small one is a lot faster to download, but it requires an internet connection. So if you don't have an internet connection, go ahead and download the complete installation image. For me, I downloaded the small installation image since I have an internet connection. So I chose the 64-bit PC because it seems more appropriate. I'm gonna add more RAM to my virtual machine, so 64 seems more appropriate. If you want to download the 32-bit, go ahead and do that. But do remember which one you downloaded, because in VirtualBox we're gonna choose certain settings that have to correspond with these version of Linux. So go ahead and click on either 64-bit or 32-bit, and after the download is complete, we'll get started and install VirtualBox. So after downloading VirtualBox, go ahead and navigate to the file location and double click on it. You'll be prompted with a similar screen, and it's a very straightforward installation. Just next. If you're on Mac, it will be a little different, but it is also a very straightforward process. Here we're gonna click next, and yes, install. Now, because I installed this before, I wasn't prompted for a virtual network card. But if you're installing this for the first time, you're gonna get a message to install a virtual network card. Then go ahead, press yes or OK for that. Now that the installation is done, I'm gonna highlight the Start Oracle VM VirtualBox and click Finish. Here it is. I already have a machine here. I'm gonna create a new one. So you wanna create a new machine on your computer. So you go ahead and click on New. Here there are 4 options. You have the name, which is the name of the virtual machine. You have the location, the machine folder, and then you have the type, which is the type of the operating system and the version of it. So the name, I'm gonna name this virtual machine Linux 1. But feel free to name it whatever you want. There, I'm gonna leave the location to the default one. I'm gonna choose, it's already chosen for me, Linux. And I downloaded the 64-bit of Linux. So if you downloaded the 32, go ahead and choose that. If you downloaded the 64, then choose that instead. And then we're gonna click next. Here we're gonna choose how much RAM we're gonna allocate to our virtual machine. And I'm gonna go ahead and allocate around 7 gigabytes. That should be good to speed up the setup process. But feel free to allocate as much as your computer components allow. We're gonna go with next. Create a virtual disk now. Yes, we want to create a virtual disk because this is a new virtual machine. We don't have a virtual disk already to import. I'm gonna choose the VDI disk image because we're just gonna use the virtual machine, the VirtualBox software, and this is the default format for this software. I'm gonna click next. Here you have 2 options. Either your virtual drive will have a fixed size, i.e. if you choose that your virtual drive will be 40 gigabytes, for example, it's gonna be 40 gigabytes regardless what data is stored in it. So if you have only 1 megabyte in there, it's still gonna be 40 gigabyte. Dynamically allocated, you can choose 40 gigabyte, but the actual file will have the size of the data stored in it. So if you have only 10 gigabytes stored in this virtual hard drive, then the file size will be 10 gigabyte. So I'm gonna go ahead and choose dynamically allocated, click next. Here you choose the size or the limit that your hard drive doesn't go over. I'm gonna choose 28. It's a nice 28, 29, yeah. It's a nice number to install Linux, maybe a couple of apps, play around with it. Click create. Now, what I like to do after I create a new virtual machine is check the settings to see that everything is correctly configured. So go ahead and highlight the machine that you just created. In my case, that's Linux 1. I'm gonna click on settings, and I'm gonna go to system and double check the RAM. Yep, that is correct, 7 gigabyte. The processor, I'm gonna add 4 CPUs to this, but depending on your hardware specification, go ahead and adjust your processor and RAM settings accordingly. Okay, 4 CPUs, and let's double check the network. Great, NAT is chosen, and that's the easiest choice. It will basically translate your IP address from your virtual IP address that is used by this virtual machine to your actual IP address when accessing the internet. Finally, we have the storage. So we can add the Linux image that we downloaded in the beginning. You highlight under the controller IDE, you highlight the empty, then navigate all the way to the right to the DVD symbol. Click on it, choose a disk file, and then navigate to the file location. Here is Debian 10.5 and click open and OK. Now we're ready to start our installation process. Now let's highlight our machine and hit start and get the show on the road. Okay, so here it's asking if this is the correct system image that we want to install, and so I'm just gonna hit start. I'm gonna click on install. So you navigate with your arrow keys in your keyboard and then you hit enter to choose. Here we go. Great. Now we get to choose the language. Now go ahead and choose whatever language you want. I'm going to choose English, and location US, and key map American English. So this will load some additional components. I'm going to pause this for a second and return when it's done. Here it asks you for the machine name or host name. I'm going to leave it as Debian. You hit the tab key on your keyboard to navigate between the buttons. So I'm going to highlight continue and hit enter. Domain name, I'm not using a domain system here, so I'm just gonna highlight continue, hit enter and leave this one empty. And here you enter your root password, and your root is basically the administrator. So I'm just gonna enter a password here and confirm the password, so enter it again, hit enter. Full name for the new user, I'm just gonna type user1, and the actual user also user1. Now we're going to type the password for this user and confirm the password again. Great. Now it's setting up the clock, and we're going to be prompted to choose a time zone. I'm just going to leave it as Eastern. Hit enter. Loading some more additional components. Now here is for partitioning, i.e. if you want to divide your hard disk. But we do not, since this is a virtual disk and its only job is to have Linux on it. So we're just going to go with guided use entire disk and hit enter. And this is the disk. We're just going to leave it highlighted and hit enter. We want all files in one partition, so we're going to choose the first one and hit enter. And here it's just double checking that you want to write these changes to your hard drive. So I'm going to highlight the finish partition and write changes, and we're going to get another confirmation after this. Yeah. Installing the base system. This will take like a little while depending on your computer speed. So I'm going to pause the video and return after. Great. So now it's just asking if you have any additional CD or DVD, which we do not. So I'm going to highlight no and hit enter. Here it's basically asking which archive server is closer to your location. So go ahead and choose the closer country to your location. For this, you need an internet connection, because it's gonna download the rest of the files for the installation from this mirror. So I'm just gonna choose UK, hit enter. And here you choose the actual mirror. I'm gonna go ahead and choose debian.org server, that one. But feel free to choose whatever server you want. I tried this before and it's good speed for me. Here it's just asking if you have HTTP proxy information that you would like to enter. In some countries there are some web addresses that are being blocked, so you could be using an HTTP proxy to get past this block. So if you do, please go ahead and enter your proxy information. Otherwise, just use your tab key on your keyboard and navigate to continue and hit enter. Here it asks if you want to participate in the survey. I'm just gonna highlight the no and hit enter. Now this is a very important part. If you want a GUI or a graphical user interface, you have to choose a desktop environment. I'm gonna go with the first choice, GNOME or whatever it's pronounced, because it's very light, and I'm not gonna do print server, and I'm gonna leave standard system utilities. You navigate with the tab key and you hit enter. But just an observation, if you do not want a desktop environment or a GUI, you don't have to choose any, you can just use the terminal. So hit continue. It's gonna take a while for this, so feel free to do something else while the installation is going. I'm gonna pause and return after this is over. Okay, so after all the software is installed, you'll be prompted to install grub bootloader. And since we're just installing Linux, so there's no harm in that. So go ahead and navigate to yes. So I'm gonna highlight this, it's the second choice, and we're gonna hit enter. Here it's finishing the installation, so that's exciting. So installation is complete, great. Just gonna highlight the continue button, hit enter. And there we go, your system is gonna reboot. I'm gonna choose Debian GNU Linux, hit enter. There we go. There we go. I'm gonna click on user 1 with my mouse. That's the user we created during the setup, so whatever user you created, you can click on it and you'll be prompted for the password. Enter your password, hit enter, and there we go. I'm gonna click on activities to get the menu. Here you can type whatever you want. I'm gonna open the terminal. Let's check the host name. Enter, it's Debian as we created it. So that's great. So with this you can really practice your Linux skills and really get to know the operating system. I highly recommend doing this, guys. It's very helpful to have Linux installed and you can check different things for how to use Linux. So that's it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed this, and if you did, please leave a like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.